As we all know, Kurapika's general mission in life is to collect the Scarlet Eyes of his clan. However, on this quest, he also developed an additional hobby of collecting all things Scarlet. Scarlet drapes, Scarlet tea sets, Scarlet Witch comics. But most importantly of all, the Scarlet subscribe button for the New World Review, the pressing of which will result in regular Hunt Hunter content uploaded straight into your YouTube feed. Hello and welcome to the New World Review, your source for everything anime and manga, and today it's Hunter x Hunter once again, as it often is, and I would like to go over 5 things that we simply need to see on the Dark Continent. And here we cue all of the comments about how, oh, we'll never get there, lazy Togashi, rah rah rah. And look, we don't like to think that way on this channel, because there is a whole ton to potentially get excited about in regards to this Dark Continent, and a surprising amount of those threads have been laid out right in front of our eyes, which is why it kind of irks me when people say we know nothing about the Dark Continent, because that simply isn't true. We know an absolute ton about it, so much so that it filled a 12-minute video on this channel, link in the description below if you are interested. But in addition to that, we also have a pretty decent idea of what to expect upon arriving there. So with that in mind, let's begin. Welcome to the top 5 things we need to see on the Dark Continent. Number 5. A new Calamity, or threat depending on what translation you subscribe to. But the existence of the Calamities are, arguably, what makes the prospect of the Dark Continent so intriguing, because it isn't just an incomprehensibly big landmass, it also plays host to an entire ecosystem of beings, each of whom could potentially wipe out humanity with very minimal effort. And just to list a simple example, we have Nanika, a Dark Continent native who is capable of, well, essentially anything at this stage. Nanika is more or less the closest thing that Hunter x Hunter has to a godlike being, and their power could well and truly be infinite, just with the one little restriction of having it be the wish of someone else. But we have less godlike creatures as well, such as Hellbell, who appears to be something of a glorified snake, but who is said to infect its prey with homicidal desire, meaning that a couple of bites could lead to mass murder. And then if you have an entire congress of snakes, then that is humanity done and dusted, wrapped up in a neat little package. This is what the Dark Continent represents, and every known expedition there has resulted in the encounter of one of these apocalyptic beings. And so when we do eventually arrive on the Dark Continent, I would expect nothing less than to have a new one pop up and be the focus of this particular voyage. But not only that, in order to be in keeping with Togashi's brilliant escalation narrative, I would expect this new Calamity to be significantly more terrifying than any of the ones we've previously encountered. At the same time though, I don't think it's completely out of the realm to possibly suggest that whatever primary force we're dealing with might come to be somewhat humanized by the end of the arc. You know, like a Meruem style situation where the tables flip, the Calamity turns out to be the good guy, and the true evil is someone like, I don't know, Beyond's Netero, who comes bearing the worst that humanity has to offer. And perhaps for the first time that we're aware of, humanity won't be constrained with a Calamity upon returning into Lake Mobius. Or maybe the opposite will happen, and they will willingly take the Calamity back for whatever reason. Either way, the true drama of the Dark Continent can only be catalyzed by a profound threat that will certainly present itself as one of, if not the biggest challenge that we have ever seen in the series. Number 4. The Gatekeeper and the Guide. Here is an existence that I think most casual Hunter x Hunter fans seem to kind of skim over and forget, but the thing is, without the Gatekeeper and the Guide, it would seem that it is entirely impossible to reach the Dark Continent in the first place. And essentially, the Gatekeeper, despite having a very singular sounding translation, is actually a race of magical beasts who hold the only known passage to the Dark Continent, so each and every time humanity has ventured there, they have assumedly gone through this magical beast middleman. And I guess what I'm most excited about in regards to this is obviously finally learning what kind of creatures the Gatekeepers are, but also delving more into magical beasts in general. Because in the series as we know it, they are a criminally underexplored aspect of Hunter x Hunter. I mean, off the top of my head, I can probably name one type of magical beast, which are the Kiriko shapeshifters, and yeah, the Chimera Ants went on to be classified as magical beasts, which does even prompt the idea that perhaps all magical beasts were originally from the Dark Continent, and that there is actually this race of supremely intelligent magical beasts that hold far more control over the world than even humanity does. But that aside, there is also the intrigue of the Guide, who is supposedly being summoned by the Gatekeeper, and they are the ones responsible for chaperoning beings to the Dark Continent. The Guide is also the one responsible for forcing humanity to bring Calamities back to the human realm after unsuccessful trips, so this being is obviously incredibly powerful and may even be one of the most fantastic uses of Nen that we will ever get to see, given that the Guide may be a conjured presence, because nothing in this world exists via magic alone, not even magical beasts. It's usually all Nen, so when we talk about summoning, we're talking about either conjuration or specialization in regards to the Guide. But of all the things we need to see on the Dark Continent, the Gatekeeper and the Guide are ones that we would encounter incredibly early on in the arc, and I very much look forward to that, whenever that time may be. Number 3. Chimera Ants. Wait, what? why Chimera Ants? We've already seen these guys at great length. I mean, not only that, but they take up almost an entire third of the series, so why do we need to see them again? And the answer is because it would be fun. And I don't mean that we bring them back to heavily focus upon them, and we certainly don't have them in the incarnation that they represented in their arc, but we do know that their specific giant species did originate from the Dark Continent, and the queen ended up in the human realm through very unknown means. However, she is but one queen of one colony, and ants being ants, there are very likely many colonies of ants out there in existence, and I think it would be really cool to reference that when we do visit the Dark Continent. So it could just be an initial encounter whereby a group of hunters are assaulted by a squad of ants, but because they've already dealt with that threat before in the human world, they'll just be quickly dispatched and no Meruem style situation will have time to occur. Although I do think it would be very interesting to see what the base form of a Chimera Ant king and their royal guard would be, because the only thing we got to see in the series was the base form of the queen. And yeah, it certainly would not be as interesting as the ones we came to know in the series, due to the lack of humans to consume as well as not having access to Nen, but a really fun contrast nonetheless, and a nice piece of connective tissue to the rest of the series, really emphasizing just how much this Dark Continent has gone on to influence this world. And not only that, but it might even be an appropriate plot point to focus on, because remember that a certain Pariston Hill is currently in command of an army of thousands of Chimera and human hybrids, all of whom are Nen users, which remains one of the more terrifying thoughts in Hunter x Hunter. But if any or all of them were brought to the Dark Continent, then there might be a couple of central figures who get to meet their ancestors and even grapple with the idea of where they came from. And I don't know, this is probably all just weird and wishful thinking from me, but once again, I'm not saying that they should be a major focus because we've already gone down that route in the series. In fact, they almost certainly should not be a major focus, but some Chimera Ants making an appearance in a chapter or two, well, that would just be a nice nod to the journey that we've had so far. Number 2. Beyond Netero versus everyone. Alright, now here is something that I am perpetually excited about, because from everything we've been given thus far, it heavily implies that Beyond is not only an exceptional powerhouse of his own, but that he also has no allegiance to, well, anybody. Beyond is the kind of man who is gunning for the Dark Continent for his own selfish and seemingly sinister and mysterious purposes. And as such, in order to achieve that, he spent half a century just preparing for this voyage to take place. And this time around, he is not going to let anyone or anything stand in his way. And I highly doubt that his interests coincide with anybody else setting foot on the landmass. I mean, we know for a fact that the Zodiac's being set up to confront him, thanks to Isaac Netero's challenge, and while Beyond is sitting quietly in custody currently, that is going to change rapidly when he gets his first whiff of the continent, perhaps resulting in a conflict where he takes on and even defeats multiple members of the Zodiacs. But Beyond is a character who has the potential to make many more enemies, and I don't think it's unreasonable at all to foresee a clash between Beyond and Jing, or perhaps even Pariston, or even the entirety of his own expedition team, because despite the fact that Beyond is the one organizing them, he has been shown to be exceptionally dishonest with them regarding the danger of the continent, and is clearly using them to achieve a very specific goal. And as for anyone else who sets foot there, well, they're no friend of Beyond either, whether that's the Phantom Troop, who are always against everyone else, or even some of the remnants of the Karkin Empire, who by this point would be well aware that Beyond went along with the plan to deceive them. So in the end, this man has very few and arguably no allies, and you know what? He doesn't really view that as a problem. And that is both endlessly exciting as well as sends a great chill down my spine, just thinking about how the power of a Netero could be applied to a truly malevolent purpose. And yet my most anticipated thing that we need to see on the Dark Continent is still to come. Number 1. Don Freaks. Now this figure is quite possibly the most intriguing presence in the entire series, and his existence was only revealed, I guess, quite recently in the grand scheme of things, but this Don Freaks presents us with the one being that we know of who has managed to more or less effectively conquer the Dark Continent. Conquer's probably not the right word, but I guess cohabitate with the Dark Continent. A location that made Isaac Netero himself sweat and claim that the only victory to be had there was survival itself. And it's safe to say that Don has achieved that victory. Although evidently Don has a very different philosophy to Netero, and over 300 years ago he made the voyage out there and began traveling the shoreline of Lake Mobius, logging his experience in a book known as Journey to the New World, which is supposedly split up into the East and West editions. And we have seen one of these being the East edition, which logs a wealth of information concerning one side of the shoreline, but the West still has yet to be found. And just why is that? Well, Mr. Jing Freaks believes that's because it has yet to be completed, and that Don is still traveling the Dark Continent, composing his journal to this very day, making him well over 300 years old, which is amazing to think about, but also very possible, because we are well aware of the existence of at least one substance on the Dark Continent known as Nitro Rice, which can extend your life, possibly into eternity, and I'm sure that there is an incredible wealth of other benefits out there as well. But the incredible thing is thinking about what kind of man Don must be to be able to constantly survive, being surrounded by beings that can wipe out the entirety of humanity with great ease. And Don is not the entirety of humanity, he is one man. And at the very least, for one whole half of the Lake Mobius shoreline, he was able to integrate himself into a very brutal ecosystem of this area, and that is an achievement that I don't think any other character in the series could hope to live up to. I mean, maybe Meruem, but that dude is practically a god, and the ants were from the continent to begin with, so meh. But that is why Don is a man who we must see on the Dark Continent, or at the very least, the legacy that he has left behind. Perhaps Jing won't even find Don, but he will stumble upon the West edition of his journal. In any case, we simply need more information about this figure, who is intrinsically linked to the Dark Continent, as well as the Freaks family, and thus the very fabric of Hunter x Hunter as we know it. But what do you guys think? Please do leave your thoughts on the Dark Continent in the comments below, or even join my Discord server. And if you're keen for some more Hunter x Hunter content, then please do go and check out some of my other videos, or even subscribe to the channel for regular Hunter x Hunter glory delivered straight into your YouTube feed. But for now, this has been the New World Review, and I'll see you next time.